Good morning, Dan and Amy. So day one of the trial of the century is in the books. We got 2 more days of opening statements. We're down to 8-hour shifts rather than 12-hour shifts. Shifts, not shifts.
Get it?
With
But
a
the
T.
shift.
Yeah, not 2 Fs. Now you're going to hear a rinsing and repeating of most of what you heard for yesterday's 8 hours, I suspect, until we get to, the key votes after arguments have been presented, questions have been asked and answered. Then we'll get to key votes on things like witnesses to get a sense of how long this is going to take. But it certainly isn't portending that it will take more than the week or two it was projected to take. I don't know that Adam Schiff and Jerry Nadler's arguments are encouraging enough Republicans to break from their party and side with them on the matter of witnesses. Schiff started the fun by outlining the basis, again, for the 2 articles of impeachment. Number 1 is abuse of power.
When the founders wrote the impeachment clause, they had precisely this type of misconduct in mind. Conduct that abuses the power of his office for personal benefit, that undermines our national security, that invites foreign interference in our democratic process of an election. It is the trifecta of constitutional misconduct justifying impeachment.
Yeah, and to that trifecta, attorney for the president's defense team, Jay Sekulow, responded.
Mr. Schiff also talked about a trifecta. I'll give you a trifecta. During the proceedings that took place before the Judiciary Committee, the president was denied the right to cross-examine witnesses. The president was denied the right to access evidence. And the president was denied the right to have counsel present at hearings. That's a trifecta. A trifecta that violates the Constitution of the United States.
Something else, too, and this is a motif that runs throughout both Schiff's arguments as well as those of his fellow House managers. Smear campaign against Joe Biden. An attempt to rig the 2020 election. What is the evidence of that? Hey, I'd like you to look into the goings-on there and maybe work with the Department of Justice in doing so. Some concerns about what was going on. How is that rigging the 2020 election? Asking a foreign ally to look into troubling news of, certainly on the face of it, substantive concerns about political corruption and potentially violations of American law, as you have Americans with political clout dealing with foreign governments and foreign businesses, and in some cases, dubious foreign businesses and business people. This whole cheating and smearing, I expect at some point somebody is going to respond to that. Adam Schiff then laying out the basis for Article 2, obstruction of Congress.
In Article 2, the president is charged with other misconduct that would likewise have alarmed the founders. The full, complete, and absolute obstruction of a co-equal branch of government, the Congress, during the course of its impeachment investigation into the president's own misconduct. This is every bit as destructive of our constitutional order as the misconduct charged in the first article. If a president can obstruct his own investigation, if he can effectively nullify a power the Constitution gives solely to Congress, indeed the ultimate power the Constitution gives to prevent presidential misconduct, then the president places himself beyond accountability, above the law. Cannot be indicted, cannot be impeached. It makes him a monarch, the very evil against which our Constitution and the balance of powers it carefully laid out was designed to guard against.
This is just an absurd argument that he makes. Asserting constitutionally provided executive privilege makes the president a monarch. Pat Cipollone responds to that using Harvard law professor Larry Tribe's own words on this topic against Schiff and the House managers, and to some extent Larry Tribe, who's an advisor.
It's ridiculous, and we should call it out for what it is. Obstruction for going to court? It's an act of patriotism to defend the constitutional rights of the president, because if they can do it to the president, they could do it to any of you, and they could do it to any American citizen, and that's wrong. And Lawrence Tribe, who's been advising them, I guess he didn't tell you that in the Clinton impeachment, he said, it's dangerous to suggest that invoking constitutional rights is impeachable. It's dangerous. And you know what? It is dangerous, Mr. Schiff.
It wasn't so long ago that Adam Schiff used to agree with Pat Cipollone and Larry Tribe. Jay Sekulow recounted a time just a few years ago under a different president when Adam Schiff's belief in executive privilege was still robust.
On June 28, 2012, Attorney General Eric Holder became the first United States Attorney General to be held in both civil and criminal contempt. Why? Because President Obama asserted executive privilege. With respect to the Holder contempt proceedings, Mr. Manager Schiff wrote, the White House assertion of privilege is backed by decades of precedent that has recognized the need for the president and his senior advisors to receive candid advice and information from their top aides. Indeed, that's correct. Not because Manager Schiff said it, but because the Constitution requires it.
As Cipollone said, not only do House Democrats not have a case, they don't even have charges. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by George Parry. He's a former federal and state prosecutor, regular contributor to the Philadelphia Inquirer and blogs at knowledgeisgood.net. George, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Well, glad to be here.
How did you size up the opening arguments?
Well, there's nothing there in terms of the charges. The charges are ridiculous. There's no legal basis for any of it. But what I'm getting out of this, there are a couple of major takeaways from my standpoint. Number one, Adam Schiff, I used to think he was just your standard issue Washington, D.C. hypocrite. I'm beginning to think as I watch him that he just may be a psycho.
Is that a legal? Is that a legal term, or yeah?
It is. It is.
Or a Hitchcockian term?
Yeah. I mean, really. I've been involved as a prosecutor and a criminal lawyer for many, many years. I've talked to guys in prisons who come across just like Adam Schiff. You know, they seem to believe what they're saying, but in the middle of it all, they'll say, well, you know, I didn't commit the crime voluntarily. It's because the Jesuits were shooting my brain with cosmic rays. And you go, what? I mean, I'm getting that vibe out of watching Adam Schiff. There's something about his demeanor. There's something about this fake sincerity that he's got going, that, you know, this is a big constitutional crisis. I mean, the guy is describing a telephone call, for heaven's sake, and he's saying, you know, this is threatening the republic. And then he's talking about, you know, not the abuse of power, but, you know, obstruction of Congress. And then he says, well, you know, they wanted to go to court to block our subpoenas. By the way, those subpoenas were never even authorized by the House of Representatives. They were so quick to just kind of run through this whole thing. They didn't even take the first step you need to take to have a proper impeachment, which is to have a House-wide impeachment vote. So without getting lost in the weeds, that's my number one major takeaway is I think Adam Schiff may need mental intervention. Wow. The other thing that I'm getting out of this, there's this old trial lawyer motto that keeps coming to mind, and it goes something along these lines. The mind can absorb only that which the rear end can endure. And it's just painful. This whole thing is painful. And I get to get up and go to the bathroom and go out to the refrigerator and have a couple of beers and come back a couple hours later. Those senators who are tied to their chairs, that's your jury. And
Right.
one of the things you learn as a trial lawyer is whatever you do, don't wear out the patience of the jury. And boy, do these people in the Senate really want to go through 6 weeks of this? Do they really want to go for calling witnesses when it means they're going to have to sit there and listen to this garbage? So you've got those dynamics going. But the final takeaway, and then I'll get off my soapbox here. What you're looking at is basically a political attack ad by the Democrats that we're paying for. The taxpayers are paying for it. But the good news is nobody's watching, and nobody's going to be convinced by any of this stuff. The people who hate Trump are going to continue to hate Trump. The people who love Trump are going to continue to love him. And I don't think it's going to shift that many votes. I don't think it's going to have that big an effect. And frankly, I can't understand what the Democrats think they're doing other than trying to dirty up the president for the upcoming election. And, while they're in there throwing mud, where was the president? Well, yesterday he was in Davos. And while this has been going on, he signed 2 major trade deals and the economy's booming. So it's like watching a murder mystery where you already know who did it and how he did it. And nobody cares. I mean, really, my takeaway.
I mean, all the networks had it on, and then toward prime time, they cut back to regular programming. But these senators, no cell phones. They can't have. All they can have is food. I mean, not food, water or milk to drink. Do you think any of them are going to collapse? I mean, when was the last time you think they pulled an all-nighter? Because they got done at 2 a.m. today. And they start up again at 1 a.m. Washington time.
Yeah, but most of them have colostomy bags as a matter of
think
course.
So?
So, I mean, it doesn't matter that much.
That's got to be brutal for them. I wonder if anyone, they're going to drop before this is over.
Well, look, I mean, in the old days, in the jury system back in England, when a jury was deliberating, they were denied food, water, and sleep. Well, I guess it's one way to make them. Yeah, right. I mean, here we are. But your point about the network programming. The other day, my wife, who is my reliable political weather vane, she went in and turned on the television, and all of a sudden I hear this string of expletives, and I said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "I can't watch General Hospital. These morons are on television talking about impeaching the president." And that's what I call the General Hospital effect. I think there's going to be some of that going on here, too. People are just going to tune out. Who wants to watch this?
Also, do you think that Democrats are have a difficult case to make out? I mean, when they have to argue process over substance, it seems like if you're arguing process, and so much of this is legalese in orientation, that it's just going to be difficult to get people interested. Wait, what's the underlying substance again? Why is it that we're supposed to remove from office? You can argue about witnesses back and forth all you want, but if you don't give me the why this is all going on, then I'm just, as you say, going to tune out, or certainly not going to confer the matter much legitimacy.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to this: they don't have a case. They just don't have a case. It's it's kind of like they're there screaming and yelling and carrying on. And when you boil it all down, you got to say, what are you guys talking about? I mean, really, what are we talking about? The president's legal team filed a very strong answer in supporting brief, and they completely deconstructed the whole thing. I guess the only real question that's open is, are any of these squishy Republican senators going to get peeled off by the Democrats to vote with them on calling witnesses? Now, for those of us who tend to be sociopaths ourselves, I think that would be a hoot if they started calling witnesses. But even there, Adam Schiff really outdid himself. And again, I think this moves him closer to the lunatic category. He was on television saying, well, of course we should have witnesses, but the president shouldn't be allowed to call witnesses like Hunter Biden.
Right.
I mean, get it? We
Right.
get to call witnesses, but he can't call his witnesses. And he said it with a straight face, you know, with those little round eyes of his darting around like he's a barricaded man. And I thought he said it with such conviction. And how do you say something that hypocritical and that outrageous and not just kind of, you know, collapse in embarrassment? So,
Yeah, I think there's a messianic quality to what you're describing with respect to Schiff's mannerisms, as well as the quality of the arguments, as you're mentioning. That's a good example, the whole Hunter Biden thing, because he has deigned it not material to the proceeding. He is George Parry, former federal and state prosecutor, regular contributor to the Philadelphia Inquirer. He blogs at knowledgeisgood.net as well. George, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
okay, enjoyed it.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
There's only one radio show in Chicago talking about today's biggest stories and telling you what they really mean. That show is this one, Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560, The Answer.
A business needs to be built on a great foundation, one with the framework of integrity and tradition. Chapel Design Build delivers just that, providing design build and general contracting services using Butler Steel Building Systems. Their projects dot the landscape from O'Hare to DeKalb. You see their work in office and warehouse additions, recreational facilities, large-scale distribution centers, and manufacturing plants all over northern Illinois. Partnering with Butler Steel Buildings, Chapel Design Build has developed an extensive subcontractor base and valuable market knowledge to get your quality built project completed on time and on budget, ensuring your project is a success for your business and one that you will be proud of for years to come. The goal is to build lasting relationships with their clients using buildings that last from Butler. Get started on your next building project built with Butler Steel. Visit chapeldb.com. That's Chapel.